So welcome everybody. So this is the second of 3 talks that I'm giving here at St. Thomas More. As I shared last week, the goal of these talks, I want to encourage you guys to think differently about marriage. I realized early in marriage I needed to think differently about marriage. And so in each of these 3 talks, I'm going to be sharing with you guys what I call a light bulb moment, where the light went off in my head. I'm like, and I just understood marriage in a whole new light. To be honest, today's talk might be more like a lightning bolt moment. It really shocked me what I'm about to share with you, but shocked me in a really good way. So the topic of today's talk is, love is joyful in good times and in bad. So how can you have a love that's joyful in good times and in bad? So that's the topic. As I shared last week, my wife and I did struggle early in marriage. After the flourish of courtship, the excitement of wedding planning. Okay, well, you've heard of postpartum depression. There is like a post-wedding depression too that can kick in after all that excitement. But we were hoping to start a family, so we started focusing on that. We got busy with work. We started to take each other for granted. So I'm going to be very open with you guys about some of the things that happened in our marriage. And I'm about to share a story that does not make me look good, but I do want to be honest with you guys. So when I proposed marriage to my wife, she had actually never cooked in her entire life. And as I was on my knees asking for her hand in marriage, the thought floated through my head that our family would have to survive on my cooking for the next 40 years. And I was not sure that was a good idea. The Christmas before our wedding, my wife's mother gave her a Virginia cookbook and a whisk for Christmas. And I remember my wife going, what am I going to do with this? My wife was a professional woman, MBA. And I tried not to be overly excited, but I said it might be helpful if one of us knew how to cook. So the week after Christmas, we actually rented a place in Cape May, New Jersey, just as a vacation. And the place we stayed in had an oven. So my wife was like, maybe I could try cooking. And my wife discovered her inner gourmet chef. And I just thought I struck it rich. So this was my reaction to my wife's cooking. Thank you, goddess. Thank you, goddess. I joked that my wife actually uses multiple ingredients when she cooks. My idea of cooking was spaghetti and ragu sauce, and we're done. So I was like, wow, this is amazing. There is no way I will ever take this cooking for granted. Fast forward 9 months into marriage, and I got so accustomed to the gourmet dinner night after night, I stopped saying thank you, goddess. Even worse, I stopped saying thank you at all. Even worse, I actually stopped feeling thankful. Even worse, I used to tell my wife, what does it take to get a cup of coffee around here? I went from thank you, you goddess, to where's my coffee in less than 1 year of marriage. And I didn't even realize I was doing it. Needless to say, my wife actually did threaten to go on strike. That's it, I'm not cooking for you anymore. We started to bicker. I did used to tell my wife, if you could just keep quiet, we would get along. I worked hard, let me come home and relax. And so we were struggling. I actually decided that it would be good to get some help. So I thought of 3 friends of mine who seemed to have very solid families. Let me call them up. They've been married 10, 20, 30 years. I'm just starting out. I was so excited to call my friends and get solid marriage advice. Friend number 1, Peter, get over it. The initial passion wears off, and then you just spend the rest of your life bickering. Get used to it. Friend number 2, Peter, no one's happily married. Just get used to it. I was like, no one? I'd been to parties at his house, by the way. He's a very interesting man. He's head of a not-for-profit, has interesting parties. I went through all his friends. They're not happy. They're not happy. They're not happy. Peter, trust me, no one's happily married. I was like, oh no. Now I'm down to my last friend on my call list. He initially had me hopeful. He said, Peter, it's not marriage. It's you. You're the problem. I was like, whew. If marriage is the problem, I'm in trouble. But if I'm the problem, hypothetically, I could fix myself. So I excitedly asked him, okay, what do I need to do? Peter, you're too idealistic. That's the problem. You need to reduce. He actually did not advocate low expectations. He actually advocated no expectations. The key to happy marriage is expect nothing. I'm like, well, I don't think I'm that idealistic. I don't expect a parade every night when I get home. Is it too much to ask your wife to smile at you when you walk in the door? And he goes, yes, it's too much to ask for a smile. It's better to be pleasantly surprised than disappointed. So I really thought I ruined my life by getting married. I'm like, oh my goodness, what have I done? And then the Daughters of St. Paul called. So I did meet the late Pope, read some of his books, and the Daughters of St. Paul asked me if I would get a talk at their bookstore on a particular book John Paul II wrote about marriage. And I was like, wow, giving a talk in a bookstore, I think that might make me an intellectual. Let me do this. As luck would have it, it was the one book by the Pope that I had never read. It was 700 pages long. But I was so excited to be considered an intellectual that I agreed to give the talk. I just have to read the book before the talk. So the book was called The Theology of the Body. And so I sat down to read it. And this is when the lightning bolt struck me. So John Paul II's Theology of the Body begins with his interpretation of the story of Adam and Eve. According to John Paul II, the whole point of the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve's story, is that's how God intended us to live before sin entered the world. So if we want to get the instruction manual for how we're to live this life, we should go back to, as Jesus himself said, we should go back to the beginning. So how did Adam and Eve live in the Garden of Eden? By John Paul II says, the story of Adam and Eve is not science, it's a myth. A myth tells a profound truth. And I have to tell you, the story of Adam and Eve contains many profound truths. But I'm going to share this one right now that just frankly shocked me. So it turns out that the story begins with God creating the whole world and everything in it, including the animals. And God gives the whole world to Adam. Wouldn't you expect the Bible to begin with man thanking God? Wow, what a beautiful gift. You've just given me the whole world. But Adam is offered the whole world, and Adam is unimpressed. So God goes, what do you have to do to impress this man? He puts Adam back to sleep, takes a rib out of his side, creates his wife Eve for him. So God wakes Adam up twice. The first time to give him the whole world and everything in it. The second time to give him his bride. So one profound truth of the story of Adam and Eve. Adam valued Eve more than everything in the world. That's a question married couples should ask themselves. Am I valuing my spouse more than everything in the world? Full disclosure, we bought a new house. I got so caught up in gardening that I completely forgot my wife. And ironically remembered the Garden of Eden story while gardening and asked myself, am I valuing my wife more than everything in the world? Oops. There have been many a time in my marriage where I've asked myself that question, and that question gave me a kick in the pants, and I need a kick in the pants many times in my marriage, that I need to really reprioritize my wife and my marriage. That's one of the profound truths of the story of Adam and Eve. You should value each other more than everything in the world. But here's the thing that really shocked me. So it turns out the first emotion expressed by man was joy. The first words spoken by man were words of joy spoken by Adam to Eve when Adam first greeted Eve. So the Bible begins with man joyfully greeting his wife. This at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. So John Paul II said there's nothing random about the story of Adam and Eve. That's how we're intended to live. So how did Adam and Eve live in the Garden of Eden? They lived joyfully. Joy should be normal. So according to John Paul II, you guys should feel joyful to be a couple every single day of your married life. You should actually be happy to be married to your husband right now. So John Paul II argued, based on this one sentence in the Bible, how Adam greeted Eve, that marriage is intended to be joyful day in and day out. 50 years from now, you should still be excited to see each other. That's normal. Getting comfortable is not normal. That's not what we're called to do, to get comfortable, or too comfortable, I should say. So my friends were wrong. But I was afraid my friends were right. Bickering did seem to be pretty normal. They had a lot of evidence to support their argument that bickering was normal in marriage. So I was actually afraid my friends were right. I was hoping I was right, that peace was normal. To read John Paul II, no, joy should be normal in marriage. That shocked me. That was a lightning bolt moment. And I remember putting the book down and asking myself this question. If the Pope is right, and he is right, that joy should be normal in marriage, I should feel joyful right now to be married to my wife. And my honest answer was, I'm not ready to kill her quite yet. But we were not joyful. We were not joyful. I mean, I'm asking, where's my coffee? I was caught up in sports, the latest news, not so excited to see my wife as I had been. So I remember saying to myself, if John Paul II is right that joy is normal, we need to get back to normal. So somehow I believed that it's possible to have a joyful marriage. A marriage that's joyful day in and day out. It's got to be possible. So I called a by the way, at the same time I was also asked to take over teaching the marriage preparation program. So I'm like, man, I better get ready to be a teacher. I want to figure out how to have a joyful marriage. So I did call a psychologist friend up who loved reading books about marriage. And I said to him, I want to learn from the best people in the field. Give me the best 2 or 3 people in the field. So Dr. John Gottman is the world's leading researcher on marriage. By the way, his name translates Gottman, man of God. The world's leading researcher on marriage. His name literally means man of God. He also recommended Professor Bill Doherty at the University of Minnesota and Michelle Weiner Davis, this amazing marriage counselor in California. So I immediately got their books, downloaded their talks. How can I have this happy marriage? So at the time, professionally, I was doing website development, and I had these long hours at my computer. So I'd be listening to talks about marriage as I was working. And I was listening to a talk by Bill Doherty. This talk changed the whole trajectory of our marriage. How can I have this joyful marriage? So Bill Doherty told the story of a couple who came to him for marriage counseling, and he asked the couple, what's wrong? And the wife raises her hand, it's me, I'm the one who's unhappy. Why are you unhappy? And she goes, well, he comes home from work, the dog runs out to greet him, he's all excited to see the dog. Then the kids come out. Not as excited as the dog, but still happy to see their father. He greets the kids with warmth and tenderness. Then he goes to our room and changes. And 20 minutes later, he tracks me down. What's for dinner? Didn't I tell you to have Johnny get his bike off the driveway? So from the wife's perspective, the dog was in first place in his heart. The children were in second place. She wasn't even in third place. She was tied with the furniture at this point. That was her complaint. Not that he was a bad person, et cetera, but that was her complaint. So Bill Doherty told by the way, Bill Doherty did ask the guy might have been me, by the way, what do you think? Well, everything's fine to me. I'm working hard, I'm taking care of you, providing for the family, I'm not complaining. If she could just keep quiet, we'd be okay. So the guy, everything's fine. I don't even know what her problem is. So Bill Doherty does tell the couple, there's nothing wrong with your marriage. You're the same two good people who fell in love in the first place. So guys, here is an extremely important sentence of marriage advice. This advice really helped us in our marriage so much. So Bill Doherty said, the key to a long-lasting happy marriage, what comes naturally in the beginning, when you're so naturally excited about each other, at some point you need to make it a habit, a ritual, a tradition. Bill Doherty lives in Minnesota, near the head of the Mississippi River. He actually says, the day you get married is like getting on a raft in the Mississippi River. And it's all downhill from there, unless you do something to change the trend of your marriage. The natural trend of marriage is for people to get comfortable and relaxed and stop saying thank you over time. That's the natural trend of marriage. So if you want a long-lasting, happy marriage, you do need to actively put positivity in the marriage. So Bill Doherty's advice is make it a habit, make it a ritual. So he actually sent the couple home. I'm giving you a homework assignment between now and next week's session. I want you to come up with a daily ritual, something you'll do every single day of your marriage. And the point of the ritual is to express to each other, I'm still excited to have you in my life. I still love you. The best moment for this ritual is the moment of reunion. How you greet each other. This is the single best marriage advice. How you greet each other really does set the tone for your marriage and family over time. Couples should always greet each other well. But how to do that, Bill Doherty urged couples to embrace a habit, a ritual of greeting. So the couple goes home. What a shame on us. The dog is the most affectionate member of our family. So they developed the daily ritual, top the dog. The next day, the husband comes home and the wife runs out the door barking at him. I'm even more excited than the dog to see you. And the husband barks back at the wife. And just like that, the romance is back in their marriage. Like that. Unbelievable. There was nothing wrong with their marriage except getting too comfortable, too quiet. The greeting changed everything. So when I heard this story, I nearly fell out of my chair. I'm like, that's us, because we were on that downhill slope. That's us. We don't have a dog, we don't have kids, but I did have a MacBook that I was deeply in love with. Top the Mac is what I need to do. That's us. Now I know why we've been kind of going downhill. Now I know what to do about it. I actually resolved to start barking at my wife. If it could work for this couple, it could work for us. I did have the good sense to practice, though. I had never owned a dog growing up, so I actually spent 15 minutes practicing barking. I'll spare you my trial runs at it. But after 15 minutes, I judged that I would make a better guard dog than like an affectionate family pet. So better not bark at my wife like this. I need to come up with my own ritual. And I did think back to something my parents did every couple of years. After dinner, my dad would ask my mom to dance. They would put on Guy Lombardo and dance in the living room. And as a little boy, seeing my parents dance in the living room, I thought that was the most beautiful thing ever. So I resolved to start dancing with my wife every time she walked in the door, and I completely shocked her. When she walked in, because she was used to me on my computer, oh hey, but this time I jumped up and ran to her. I just have to dance with you. By the way, I'm a terrible dancer. You don't need to be good. There was no music playing, and I just held my wife close, and I was stunned. I was absolutely stunned. Peter, this is not your roommate. This is the love of your life, that just walked in the door. I got married at age 40. Peter, you waited 40 years to meet her. And in less than 1 year of marriage, you forgot how lucky you are. So how you greet each other is just the single best daily opportunity to remind yourself, this is not my roommate. This is the love of my life that I'm getting to share life with. But everything looks different if you can remember you're living with the love of your life. I actually want to take out the trash. My wife doesn't mind picking up after me if I'm the love of her life. But if I'm her roommate, that's a whole different story. But romance is the missing ingredient in so many marriages, and couples really do need to cultivate romance. How often? Every day for the rest of your married life together, you should strive to cultivate romance. So the number one advice is how you greet each other really does, make such a huge difference. Now, by the way, a couple told me sometime later that actually this Top the Dog story, which I thought was so out of left field, the Bible actually begins with Adam topping the dog in the Garden of Eden. God did give Adam all the animals. And Adam was like, so Adam greeted Eve better than he greeted the animals. So the Bible begins with Adam topping the dog in the Garden of Eden. So it's such a profound thing, how you greet each other. And that story of Adam and Eve has such profound truths. So for the rest of your lives, I want to see you guys excited to see each other. So that's just, if you can do that, everything else tends to fall into place, to be honest. So the theme of this talk is love is joyful in good times and in bad. So I want to urge you today to truly live your wedding vows. To be honest, on my wedding day, I did not understand my wedding vows. I did promise on my wedding day to love my wife in good times and in bad. What I thought that meant, my mom did come down with Alzheimer's, and my dad heroically loved my mom through like 4.5 years of Alzheimer's. My dad actually became a saint during that time. And so I was up in the altar, I was saying to myself, as I was looking at my wife exchanging vows, if you ever get Alzheimer's 40 years from now, boy, am I gonna love you, just like my dad loved my mom. Yes, that's keeping my wedding vows, loving in a bad time. What I did not realize is the promise to love in good times and in bad also include a promise to love my wife when she's cranky. Oops. So we were actually traveling in Siena, Italy, when my wife, by the way, gets cranky when she's tired. She gets tired when we travel. So there we are in Siena, Italy on vacation, and she got cranky. And I remembered going, ugh, this is a bad time. We're supposed to be enjoying this vacation. Here she is cranky. But the phrase, this is a bad time, stuck in my head. Bad time. Wait a second. You actually promised to love your wife in bad times. I think this actually counts as a bad time that you're supposed to love your wife. I even joked with myself, if I knew I was promising to love my wife when she was cranky, I'm not sure I would have made the promise. My wife used to get cranky quite a lot, I have to tell you. So in Siena, I realize I'm violating my wedding vows. I'm loving my wife when she's cheerful, and I'm not loving her when she's cranky. That's a violation of my wedding vows. And I always want to be the person that lives his wedding vows. So I made a bold prediction. My wife will get cranky again. So instead of reacting poorly, how should I react the next time she gets cranky? We were in Italy, and my wife is Italian American, so I resolved to start calling my wife my crankissima and dancing with her when she's cranky. So sure enough, my wife got cranky again in Siena. But this time, instead of being a little colder, I turned her on the sidewalk in Siena and said, "My crankissima, come here." And I actually danced with her on the sidewalk of Siena. My wife was stunned to be loved when she was cranky. And an amazing thing happened, by the way. She got half as cranky, half as often once I started to make it a practice to love her when she was cranky. So I realized my early failure to love her when she was cranky actually was making her even crankier, because she's like, "Oh no, here we go again. You know, he's going to be mean to me." And it would just make her crankier quicker and more cranky. But now when she knows she can be loved when she's cranky, ironically, she gets cranky less often. So truly live your wedding vows. How could you have a joyful marriage in good times and in bad? Truly live your wedding vows. So here's a very key point. But this is where I think so many marriages fail. Our marriage was failing. If I'm going to love my wife in a bad time, a small bad time, I have to be aware that there's a small bad time. So Dr. Gottman said anyone can be loving when your spouse has a broken leg. It's like so obvious. You have to be a pretty cruel spouse to like, forget it, that's your problem. That's like a big bad problem. But to love someone when they're tired, to love someone when they're worried, to love someone when they're a little cranky, we often don't even notice those moments. So if you want to be really good at marriage, you need to be aware of the small moments. So one of the most important things I learned, so Dr. Gottman found that couples who connect for 2 minutes in the morning in non-distracted communication feel closer and are more positive the entire day. Key point, 2 minutes. So I used to give my wife a quick kiss. "Okay, I'm heading out." That's good, but it's too quick. I'm not stopping long enough to notice. Is she tired? Is she worried about something? When we come in and reunite and we do our little dance, we dance for about 2 minutes of non-distracted communication. But I was shocked. Not only was I shocked that, my goodness, this is the love of my life that I came home to, I was shocked that I could feel her mood. I had slowed down enough to like, I think she's tired. Maybe I should volunteer to make dinner tonight. Early in marriage, I was just like, "Oh, hey, what's for dinner? Where's my coffee?" Without even realizing that my wife had a bad day. So this is absolutely crucial advice. Couples should have, over 90% of communication is nonverbal. Over 90% of communication is nonverbal. If you want to be a connected couple, you have to be in the habit of stopping and looking at each other. I reenacted how I used to greet my wife, and I discovered that I gave her 0.7 seconds of attention when I walked in the door. "Oh, hey." It was a positive 0.7 seconds. It was 0.7 seconds. You're not going to learn anything from 0.7 seconds. So to slow down and take a look, So I marry this concept of the 2 minutes with the concept of the daily rituals. So So how can you have a joyful marriage day in and day out? Start every day on a positive note. Beginning tomorrow, if you haven't already done it, start every single day of the rest of your life together on a positive note. Agree on a ritual, like how would we like to do this? I invite my wife to sit on my lap in the morning. Hey, come here, what's your day gonna be like? I did have to tell her not to be too cheerful in the mornings because I'm still waking up. But we negotiated a positive ritual to start every day of our life together on a positive note. And we stopped for 2 minutes to notice, hey, the baby kept her up all night last night. Maybe I should be a little more appreciative today and offer to get her a nap when I get home. I'm a better husband if I stop and notice how my wife is doing. So to get in the habit of slowing down, this world we live in is too fast-paced. To slow down and look at each other is just one of the most amazing things you can do. So I do want to share with you a story that was kind of funny. I've always been a good guy, but early in marriage I was a good guy who did not notice that my wife was tired or worried or something like that. So then we started this daily ritual of dancing. It's more like a glorified hug in our case. But because I did it every day, I was able to pick up on the subtle shifts in my wife's mood. So one day, maybe 3 or 4 days into it, I was like, compared to yesterday, there's like a hint of tension in her face. Something I never would have noticed before. So I said to my wife, I think there's something on your mind. Let's sit down and talk about it. My wife looked at me like an alien had abducted my body. It's like, is this my husband? He's actually showing interest in me? So I went to her again. No, really, I'm interested to hear what's on your mind. My wife was just frozen. Is this my husband? I had to sit down on a couch. No, really, I'm interested in hearing what's on your mind. And my wife actually did walk toward me like an alien had abducted my body. Like, oh my goodness, am I going to be sent to a spaceship if I sit down next to him? But I actually listened to her. And she was shocked. She was absolutely shocked that I had noticed and listened to her. So make that a habit to notice and listen to each other. By the way, my wife used to be too excited to see me. Okay, you're here. Let's talk about this and this and this. I'm like, if she took one look at me, she would know this is not the right time for this conversation. So it's a two-way street. Both of you need to really get in the habit of looking at the other. So to love in bad times, you have to be aware that it's a bad time and to be aware of the small bad times. She's tired. Maybe she's worried about something. In my own, okay, here's another story. The theme of this story is there's a time to love and a time to talk. Giancarlo, this might be a painful story for you because it involves cars that get banged up. Giancarlo's in that business. There's a time to love, a time to talk. The moment of reunion is always a time to love, always a time to love. So my wife called me up one day crying. Peter, I just banged up our car. She was really upset that she had done that. So that night when I walked home, I did stop to take a look at the car. What should I tell my wife? My first thought was to say, don't worry about it. But then I realized even mentioning the car would not be a good idea. So I actually decided to not mention the car and dance with my wife with twice the passion. So I have rewritten the wedding vows in my own head. I will love you in good times and twice as much in bad times. We're least likely to be loved in a bad time, by the way. You broke the car, you banged up the car, what happened? Then you just feel worse. So let me lift up my wife. So it was amazing what happened. My wife was really down about it. And I walked in the door, and she was clearly expecting a lecture. She was not excited to see me. She thought I was going to come in with a lecture. Instead, I came in so excited to see her. I'm like, come here! I put even more gusto in it. She was shocked, but she was so happy to see me do that. She ran to me. Then as we were doing our little dance, my wife actually got confused. She thought I forgot about the car. She's like, don't you remember? He's being so nice to me. Don't you remember? I called you up. I banged up the car. And I was like, oh yeah, the car. It's a little easier to park now. And she just laughed. We had an amazing evening, which led to a pretty good morning. The following night, I sat down with her and discussed proper parking technique. So it's not like I ignored the issue, but there's a time to love and a time to talk. And don't confuse the two. So I want to share one of the most important things I've learned from all the research I've ever done. I actually took a course, it's a famous course actually, from Cal Berkeley online. You can take it for free. It's the science of individual happiness. Tens of thousands of people have taken this course from around the world. And what really struck me is the science of individual happiness is almost the same as the science of marriage happiness. So there are different things that go into being happy. But according to the Cal Berkeley course, the single biggest factor that determines if you're happy or not, they said 40% of your happiness in life is determined by this one thing. Is your last positive thought still fresh in your head? Is your last positive thought still fresh in your head? By the way, after the Cal Berkeley talk, I'm like, let me intentionally enjoy my coffee in the morning a little more instead of just drinking it. Then if you ask me 1 hour later, Peter, how's life? Hey, it's good. I had a cup of coffee this morning. Learning to appreciate the little things is actually very important. So if your last positive thought is fresh in your head, you're happier to be alive, it turns out. Turns out the same is true in marriage. Date night is not the key to a happy marriage. The key to a happy marriage is small, positive connections frequently done. So starting tomorrow, if you haven't already done it, start every day of your life together on a positive note. You're beginning the day in a joyful mode. The longer you go between positive connections, the less positive the connection feels, which opens the door to negative thinking. So in a normal day, I strive to go no longer than 3 hours without doing something short, simple, and fun to let my wife know, hey, I'm still thinking about you. I try to send her a quick video from the city. Hey, just want to share where I am. But my wife will notice my mess. But if I made her laugh an hour ago, she'll be more cheerful about my mess. But if she hasn't heard from me, she could start to really dwell on my failings a little too much. So in a normal day, I strive to go no longer than 3 hours without doing something short, simple, and fun, just to let my wife know I'm thinking about her, to cultivate joy in our marriage every single day. That's in a normal day. In a bad day, for example, when we had a baby, women are 50 times more likely to hear the cry of a baby in the middle of the night than a man is. I was like, oh no, my wife hates being tired, and we're about to have a baby. Those days, I call my wife up once every hour. Thanks again for staying with our baby last night. 1 hour later, thanks again for staying with our baby last night. By the way, my wife went a whole month without a single good night of sleep. I thank my wife probably 12 times a day for staying up with the baby the night before, and she did not think it excessive to be thanked that often because it was that difficult. So love more, not less, when you notice it's going to be a tough day for whatever reason. But upping the frequency. Old me, if I didn't read the research, by the way, I would have taken my wife out to romantic dinner. Oh, the baby kept you up all month. Let's go out to a romantic dinner. And then she would have fallen asleep. at the dinner table. More frequent appreciation was exactly what I should have done, and thankfully I knew to do. So it's the frequency of small positives. How can we have a marriage that's joyful in good times and in bad? And the answer is start every day in a joyful note. Do little things throughout the day to cultivate a joyful marriage. Greet each other on a joyful note. Be aware if you need to put a little extra effort into it. And that's how you can do it. Now, I do want to share, let me make sure I'm not talking too much. We did, so I'm talking about loving in small bad times. We did have a big bad time in our marriage. We had 4 years of infertility, 4 years of infertility. Absolutely devastating. And how can you be joyful when you're dealing with such a sorrow like that? And couples with infertility are 3 times more likely to get divorced because the sorrow just overwhelms the marriage. And the answer is what we've been talking about. The normal amount of positivity was not enough during that very difficult time. My wife's prior boss divorced his wife and married another woman and had a baby with another woman. And my wife was just terrified that I was going to leave her over infertility. So I went all in on this advice. Every morning, every hour, I called my wife up just to hey, I'm thinking about you, showing her I'm still happy to be with her. I danced with her with twice the passion during infertility. If I got up to go to the bathroom, I would hey, come here, and just dance with her some more. It took my wife 4 years to come to terms with infertility. And at the end of the 4th year, she told me, Peter, that was hard, those 4 years. But you were there for me every step of the way. That's when she shared with me that she had feared every single day that I was going to leave her that day. Every day when I came home, I was worried that today would be the day you didn't want to dance with me. But every single day, you got up and showed you were happy to see me. She told me it was a small miracle in her life to see me want to dance with her every single day. And trust me, I was dealing with my own deflation over it. And when she said that, I was like, thank you all those researchers who shared this advice to do these little things every day. And I also thanked our Lord above for the wedding vows and really committing myself to my wedding vows. The single best discipline I've developed is to stop before I open the door. Peter, you're about to greet your wife. You're down. She's down. She's been down for 2 years. But you made a promise before God, family, and friends to love your wife in good times and in bad. Now's the time to keep the promise. So even during a really big, dark, and difficult time, we were absolutely disappointed, but our marriage was a source of joy for us every single day. So I do want to end with one last story. So some people listening, some people here might think, well, I'm just not that kind of personality. So I do want to end with this one story. It's one of my favorite stories. So when I meet with couples pre-marriage, I give them a test. And one of the questions on the test is, does your future spouse sometimes annoy you? So I've asked 10,000 people over the years, how does she annoy you? Get ready for that, by the way. I'm going to ask you when I meet with you guys. How do you annoy each other? So I've asked 10,000 people, how does he annoy you? How does she annoy you? So here's one of my all-time favorite answers. But he was a good guy. I want to stress this guy was a good guy. He was just very quiet. He looked, frankly, uncomfortable in his own body. And the girl goes, Peter, I have only one complaint, lack of emotional connection. He has never even once asked me how my day went. I called my mother up to complain about the lack of emotional connection. My own mother laughed at me. Never expect a man to emotionally connect you. He's a good guy. You can trust him to be there, for you. The key to a happy marriage is have girlfriends. So this girl was so depressed, telling me her own mother's advice for happy marriage is you should have girlfriends. So I said to the girl, I hate to disagree with your mom, but men are capable of emotional connection. We can ask you, how was your day? Those are 4 very simple words. We can ask you that question. We can listen to your answer. We can do that. I then shared the same advice that I shared in this talk. The next morning, the girl emailed me, Peter, you're not going to believe what happened. We went home after meeting you. He actually asked me how my day went. It was my wildest dream. I broke down crying that he asked me how my day went. It's not the end of the story. Fast forward 2.5 years. It was a beautiful Saturday in New York City. I was meeting with couples outdoors on the lawn in Bryant Park. Fairly crowded in the park that day. Out of the corner of my eye, I see a couple walk onto the lawn. This is 2.5 years later. They were holding hands. And I wasn't even looking directly at them, but I said to myself, that couple's in love. I mean, they just stood out. They were radiating love and affection. Some moments later, their path took them closer to where I was sitting. And I looked up again and was like, oh my goodness, that's the couple I met. She was complaining about lack of emotional connection. He seemed uncomfortable in his own skin. 2.5 years later, they were a walking advertisement for marriage. They saw me and they came over to me, and this is what they told me. Peter, we're a little embarrassed to tell you, we're afraid of what the neighbors think. We have been barking at each other ever since we met you. So they literally embraced this barking ritual, and 2.5 years of barking, transformed this guy from his former, repressed self into this amazing, man, and she was the happiest girl ever, I have to tell you. So her mother was wrong. But there was a couple that took their marriage to the next level. And the key is the day-to-day. I thought the key to marriage was a romantic dinner and a nice summer vacation. That's all icing on the cake. It's the day-to-day, to do little things every day, to enjoy the day-to-day. So anyway, that's today's talk. Any thoughts or questions from anyone on that one? Woof woof? Anyway, so yes.
I think what I'm getting, this is our second session, is that you have to be more thoughtful. You have to think about your interactions, and you have to create more positive space in your marriage. Is that what I get?
Absolutely. So Bill Doherty, Dr. Gottman is the world's leading researcher on marriage. I consider Bill Doherty the wisest and just good man. And he has 2 books. One is The Intentional Couple, and the other is The Intentional Family. So it's exactly your point, that we need to be aware and we need to have a plan. We just can't expect, that everything's going to fall in place. So that's why I developed the habit of stopping before I open the door. So I have an intention to walk in. I sometimes go to myself, Peter, you're exhausted. You're in a bad mood. You don't have to be cheerful the whole night, but just this next 2 minutes, and that makes all the difference in the world. So you're exactly right. You have to have that kind of intention. So any other thoughts or questions? All right, so next week we're going to also kick it up a notch. So we have one more talk to go. So